All right, good morning, guys. My name is Matt Howard. I think a lot of you guys remember me a couple weeks ago when we talked about chemistry and some other topics. Today we're going to be talking about biodiversity sustainability. It's a really good quote, and I know the book, this is in your book because I read the chapter too. There's no solution, I assure you, to save the Earth's biodiversity other than preservation of natural environments in reserves large enough to maintain wild population sustainability. Basically, there's no solution unless we start saving our natural environments for populations, which meaning people, wild populations, wolves, bears, birds, everything, unless we have enough natural environment reserves, meaning parks, natural conservancy groups, all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was pretty important. I'm not too big on quotes because I think they're kind of cheesy, but that one kind of struck me. So major things we're going to cover today are forest ecosystems, deforestation, and what that can bring upon, sustaining forests, importance of the world's rainforests. And I have some pretty cool stuff to show you about that, as well as sustaining marine biodiversity. I took a lot of this. I went on Sunday, it was Saturday and Sunday, I went over this and tried to add some really cool stuff that I thought you guys would appreciate, and instead of just reading slides, show you pictures, which I think is a big thing, and show you kind of real world examples of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you have questions, it may be on the next slide where I show you. So let's talk about forest. They vary in makeup, age, and origins. Old growth forest, you're going to see those throughout the world. Uncutted or regenerated forest, they're approximately 36% of the world's forests that are alive today. Second growth forests are result in secondary ecological succession. Those ones can be from after a tree farm. They come back and they replant them, or a forest fire. You guys have ever seen like national park forest fires? They will go back and replant fires, and that would be ecological succession. Cool note to note, if you guys ever been to Yosemite or the Sequoia National Park right there, you've seen those giant redwoods. To actually get the seed, the pine cones, or I don't know if they have pine cones, but the seeds, kind of like Joshua trees have those little berries things. To get those open on one of those sequoias, it actually needs fire. So those fire is a natural thing that helps forests regenerate and opens up those pods so seeds can be released and they can grow more trees. So not all forest fires are bad. Forest fires in general are bad, I will tell you that as a human being and a person. They're bad, but they do serve a purpose. So, and then tree plantations, we'll see those. There's good and bad things to those, or to tree plantations, and we're going to cover both, not just on the commercial side or tree farms, but also the secondary results from that. So what do old growth forests look like? This is one of them. You can see that they have healthy vegetation growth all the way up. You can see moss, you can see plants on the bottom. Kind of looks like a rainforest, but not technically a rainforest, but you see this shrubbery on the bottom. This is where you're going to find old growth forests that haven't been touched. Under the soil, there's an interconnectivity of all the roots that share information. Usually it's through mushrooms. People don't really realize how important mushrooms are. If you've seen them in your grass, you probably think, oh, mushrooms, get them out of here. They actually help communicate to all the other grass. I know it sounds really dorky, but it's true. They actually help communicate what's going on in the soil and everything with the grass. So this is all interconnected, believe it or not. Did you have a question? Oh, by the way, if you guys have a question, just raise your hand. I know I have a question slide at the very end, but I like dialogue, so if you guys have a question, just raise your hand. Here's another one. You're going to see the same thing. Untouched, out in the middle of the forest. You see a lot in Oregon, Washington when you get up north, where it rains a lot in Montana. So on sustainable tree plantation, this is kind of the circle of what they do. They clear cut a forest that's about 25 years old. They'll log it, and they'll remove all these, and then they will plant seedlings. Well, excuse me. Let's go this way. They'll plant seedlings. 5-10 years, they'll be small trees. 10 to 15 years, they'll be a little bit bigger, and then from 15 to 25 years, you'll have a forest where they start to log that. That is a commercial forest that's sustainable. You see that after they clear cut these 25-year trees, they plant new ones, which is a sustainable type of planting trees. So ecosystem services, they support the energy flow and chemical cycling. Like I said, the plants and stuff at the bottom die and decay. That provides nutrients to the trees, which the trees uptake. Trees die, they fall. Decomposers, we talked about the bacteria and everything decomposes that tree, adding more stuff to the soil, so that chemical cycling continues. They reduce soil erosion, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. They absorb and release water. They purify the water in the air. They purify the air by photosynthesis 1 and 2, if you guys have taken biology. Taking in oxygen or CO2, carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen. They influence local and regional climate. I'm sure everybody's gone up to Big Bear or Crestline. You guys know it's a little bit cooler up there. Generally trees are a little bit higher, and there'll usually be a tree line. So if you guys are headed up to Silverwood Lake, you guys can usually see a tree line where the pine trees start, and above that elevation, the pine trees will continue. They only survive down to a certain point, and so we have more of a tundra desert down here. They store atmospheric carbon, which is one carbon sink. We're going to talk a lot about carbon sinks today. Carbon sink is basically where you can sequester carbon, which basically lock that carbon up, and that would be taking in CO2. So that's one major point of, and they use it in their photosynthesis. That's one major source of the carbon sink, which is forests and the rainforest. Also supports habitats. Don't forget, forests have trees, bugs, plants, a whole ecosystem that they support. So economic services, fuel wood, firewood. You guys like going camping? You guys like to have a fire? They provide that. Lumber, if you've ever been to Lowe's, you can know there's just lumber after lumber after lumber. Pulp to make paper, which you guys all have in front of you. So that all came from a tree. There's not some mystical way to make paper. It is made out of wood and trees. Mining the trees. Livestock grazing. When there's forests, you can let cows out and they can graze and eat the smaller plants on the bottom. Everyone likes going to national parks for recreation, and when there's recreation, that in turn also has jobs. So question to class, what is the best heating source for your home in respect to sustainability? So if you have propane, natural gas, firewood, what's the heating oil, anything else? Raise a hand. What's the best source of heating for your house for sustainability of our resources? You say something?
Solar.
Say that again?
Solar.
Solar? Yeah, I didn't think about that, but yes, that is a very good answer. Anybody else? Okay, so we have heating oil, propane, natural gas, and those are three major heating ones they use. Those are all fossil fuels. That's a limited, finite resource. We've already kind of gone through the cycle of how we can create trees. So best answer is firewood, because firewood is a natural, or can be regrown, and it's not a finite resource. Plus, when you plant a tree, it uptakes carbon, so any of the CO2 you burn off during the firewood, it's counteracted by taking in by the trees. So, and one thing that's important, people think that, you know, the firewood, because I burn firewood at my house, that's what I use. People think that firewood bought locally is from like Oregon or something. I know the Christmas trees we buy down here are from Oregon, but typically the firewood we buy is from tree trimmers from down the hill in Southern California that the city has basically said, this tree is in the way, let's get rid of it. Chop it down. It's a 50-year-old tree that would look perfect and was only this big, you know, 50 years ago. Now it's this big and we got to get rid of it. So what they do is instead of sending it to a landfill, they sell them off to tree trimmers, and the tree trimmers then sell it to people who can sell it as firewood. So it's kind of this cycle as everyone thinks that we're just chopping down trees and making firewood. It is, but it's for a purpose for a city that they're going to do good for it. So it's actually, that's another reason why it's the best firewood. So, or the best sustainable heating source for your home. So hopefully that made sense. So now we're going to talk about what are some some major threats to logging and forest ecosystems. Harmful effects of logging roads, increase erosion, water quality issues. That's what I want to talk about when we get to the photo. Sediment runoff into runways or to waterways. That's a huge one. Habitat fragmentation. You're basically, when we get to this slide, I'll kind of cover this. Loss of biodiversity. Anytime you create a road and something that's not typically there, you're gonna fragment some habitat. You're gonna lose some biodiversity. Maybe not on a grand scale, but you'll lose some of it, especially if it's a 30-mile road into logging country. I mean, you're gonna lose that road. You're gonna have, when it rains, you're gonna have sediment runoff. You're gonna have erosion, which is gonna go down to the creeks nearby. Forest exposed to non-native pests, disease, and wildlife species. We're going to talk about the bark beetle in just a minute. Accessibility to forests, miners, hunters, off-road vehicles, etc. Good thing in California, they have, as much as I like to think that most off-roaders, as myself, stay on OHV trails, which off-road vehicle trails, they don't, which is unfortunate. So if you guys do have them, stay on the off-road vehicle paths, because those are designed for off-road vehicles. Miners and hunters. Miners, there's not so much, there is in California, but not so much in forests. And hunters, as long as you pack in, pack out, that's kind of the thing of the natural parks and the state parks, or you'll get fined. Okay. So we have an old growth forest, and what we're doing is we're going to create a new highway, and we're steaming through this. It almost looks like it's burning, but that's not how they do it. They're cutting a new road, so you can see that this is going to be about 30 feet wide, and you're going to lose all that habitat and the habitat fragmentation and loss of biodiversity. So you're cutting down that old growth forest. They should be cutting it so they can use paper with it, you know, dual purpose. If you have to build a road, cut the trees, send them to the lumber mill so you can get paper out of it. Just don't burn them up, because that causes air pollution and everything else like that. So the highway's now in. They cleared plots for grazing. So now you have cows out there and pastures. Now you have farms, and it still looks like they're burning. I don't know why they're burning the burning the forest, but I wondered that yesterday, and I was like, oh, we'll just go with it. They chop it down. This brings on clearing plots for grazing. That brings on cows, moose, whatever you're grazing. There's water quality issues there because they poop, and that gets down in the groundwater, and then you pump the groundwater out, and then they put it on your food, and that food goes to your supermarket, and you end up, you know, it's kind of a closed cycle. So yeah. Getting back to the cleared forests in the United States, you know, back in the 1620s and to 1920, the United States in the eastern half was just decimated because pioneers were looking to build log cabins, right? You always hear about that in your history books. Pioneers came over, built log cabins. I mean, I would love to own a log cabin. I think they're beautiful. and in the eastern United States to get from the coast. When did Christopher Columbus land? 1547. I always forget that. 1492. So okay. So you're talking about 150 years from once he landed for all the ships to get back over here. So you have a sustainable population of people. Now they're going to start building houses. So that's when you start to see the decimation start. So what happened is we have regulations and everything now that from 1920 to currently, there's actually more forest because of environmental regulations and things that Congress and the presidents passed. Not just the current president, but presidents before them, that they passed to protect these forests. Since the 1960s, biological simplified tree plantations have reduced biodiversity. Yeah, let's move on from that. I know I got to keep an eye on time because last time I went over. So there's three major tree harvesting methods. There's selective cutting, clear cutting, and strip cutting. First thing when I see this, if you guys have ever watched the Discovery Channel and those guys who do the loggers, where they're, it's all drama and they dramatize it, where they're just clear cutting the forests and they bring up the big logs and they have the machine that strips the branches off. That's the first thing I think of when I think of any of these cuttings. So, and granted, they're allowed to do that, and they film them, and it makes for entertaining and I think an informational source of how we collect, logs and we harvest trees. But I don't necessarily agree with it. So, right here we have selective cutting, which is basically you can see the little stumps right here in where I'm pointing at, where you don't decimate the forest. You keep trees up to maintain the habitat. You keep some trees there. You have a road in there, obviously, so that the tree cutters can get in. You can see a couple more tree stumps right there, but they leave a lot of stuff by the river alone, or the stream, excuse me. And what this does is, you guys have seen this in the Cajon Pass when we had the big fires 2 years ago. What happened the next year? There we had massive flooding. And why is that? Because all the brush dies, the roots die, which now make the soil loose underneath. And then when it rains, now all that water is just soaking into mud essentially and now falling down. So that's why it's important when you guys are looking at this to actually still have some roots in there, because those tree roots are keeping that soil bound up so that if there's a huge rain, there's not just a big mudslide, kind of like we saw in the Cajon Pass. Clear cutting, which is the worst way you can do it, because what's going to happen, this is essentially like burning the forest. You clear cut it down and eventually these tree roots will die. But what happens when it rains is you can kind of see there's no striations coming down like when it rains, because the forest is going to soak that up. Here, you see these little striations coming down. That means when it rains up in the mountains and it comes down, it's going to carry mud, debris, everything with it. Kind of just like what we saw in the Cajon Pass. And you can see there's a muddy stream. And then there's strip cutting, where it's kind of the in-between these, where you have you cut one section, cut 1 year ago, you have your dirt road, and then you cut 3 to 10 years ago, you let it grow back, you can see some smaller trees right there, and then you have your uncut by the stream, and then uncut up here. But ideally this is the process. But what drives all this? Economics. People who want to make money. And if regulations allow people to do this, then people are going to do that. Ideally you'd want something like this or like this, but based on regulations, and if you're running a business and you cared about profits and money, you put your own money into it, and you lived in California, you're working in Oregon, you'd say, okay, I'll muddy the stream, I don't got to live there. I mean, realistically, that's how these people think. So that's one thing that we have to keep in mind. So deforestation, tropical forests, Latin America, Indonesia, and Africa. I know this sounds really lame, like it's not true, and I have some good slides to show you that it is true. the Borneo forests in Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia, and Russia. Deforestation concerns climate change due to effect on the carbon cycle. Once again, one of two major sinks in the carbon cycle. So carbon sink, when I'm talking about carbon sink, is we all drove here in cars today, emitted CO2. That CO2 gets up in the atmosphere, and then it has to go somewhere to be sequestered. So it's a sink. That's where it's going to end up. And trees and the rainforest are two major sinks, not just for the United States, but for global CO2 emissions. So it is a big deal when we talk about deforestation. Role in species extinction. And when we talk about species, we're not just talking about animal, we're also talking about plants. And we're going to talk about plants and how plants play a huge role in the deforestation concerns. Okay, so you guys can't really see it. All right, so this is in Brazil in 2000. You have one road right here, and you can kind of see there's a huge swath right here. There's some development, some roads, but all this is thick, rainforest that hasn't been untouched. Let's fast forward 17 years. Look at how much growth has happened around this. I mean, granted, there's this big growth right here, which is not a lake. That's rainforest. This is all growth and people moving into the area. And what they do is they come in, they slash it, they burn it down, and they plant crops that will make them money. Just like we talked about earlier, it's all driven by economics. But look at the difference between the two. That's 17 years. What's going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years? I know there's really not much I can do because I'm an American and this is Brazil and a whole different, country. But be mindful of it. That's the one thing that we have to do is be mindful of it. And, if you guys ever become senators or assemblymen or assemblywomen, you guys can do something about it. But look at the stark difference. So when I didn't make this up. This is straight off Google Earth from Sunday. And there's a little time lapse where you can go back. And you guys can do this all over Brazil, all over Costa Rica, everywhere. They're clearing the forest so they can plant things or to live. So that was a good slide. Tropical deforestations are varied and complex. What are the causes? They're not valuing the ecological services. Let's flip that around. If I was down there and I didn't have much, I would cut down a forest so I could live and make a living. I mean, you can see their vantage point. It's not good for the rainforest or for the world, but you can see their flip side. Crop and timber exports. So when they cut down those ancient old growth forests, they export that either that crop or that timber to make money. There's government policies that allow them to do that. Which is, like I said, is making that sink smaller and smaller. So, the carbon load is ever increasing, right? And now the sink is getting smaller and smaller. So you have to think about that. So when we talk about global warming, and we talked about it last time, carbon's only a fraction of what causes carbon dioxide is only a fraction of what global warming is about. But when you have these sinks that are getting smaller and the supply getting higher, it fills up that sink really quick. Poverty and population growth. It's one thing that we have to address. I mean, there's poverty, like I said. If I lived down there, I would probably do the same thing, which is very unfortunate. But if I wanted to make a living for my family and I had kids, the forest wouldn't mean anything to me. I would want to provide for my family. That is hand in hand with population growth. So what are the direct causes of this deforestation? Roads, fires. Like I said, they set fires to instead of clear cutting it like we do in here in the United States, they'll burn the forest down. Settler farming, cash crops, coffee is a huge one. You guys all like the Brazilian coffee that they serve at Starbucks. It's coming from some cleared rainforest. Cattle ranching. Everyone likes hamburgers and steaks. Unless you're vegan, which is cool. Logging and tree plantations. Highly doubt tree plantations are being put down there because I've seen enough media to know that there's rare minerals down in in South America and Africa, where they'll clear the forest to mine these precious resources. So right now, I think in the Republic of Congo, they cleared a bunch of forests because all these new electric cars require lithium, and they're mining the lithium out of the Congo. And the Republic of Congo, I think that's the government. They're not doing anything about it. So that's one thing too. Is it's not just a cash crop; it's cash minerals, cash anything you get cash for. I mean, unfortunately that's how it is. So we here can manage our forest more sustainably. There's a monetary value of old growth forests and southern growth forests in the ecosystem. And it far outweighs the monetary value of short-term economic services, as well as the animal populations, the plant and tree populations, and watershed protection. So we may cut. I mean, it's kind of like cutting down old growth forests and southern growth forests to gain a monetary value. You're gaining money, but you're also affecting all these other things. For every cause, there's for every reaction, there's an equal reaction. Physics. Okay, so national forests. I wanted to point this out because I give talks to high schools at Silverwood State Park. Although people don't think Silverwood is a state park, that should say state park. I'm sorry. It's not. No, it is national. This is national forest. I'm sorry. Silverwood is a state park. Excuse me. But San Bernardino National Forest, these mountains right up above us, is a national forest, just like the San Gabriel Forest over kind of above Phelan is a national forest as well. So these are all national forests that our government has deemed, hey, we need to maintain these forests. And if you ever go into one, you'll see pack in, pack out. They'll have rangers, and they're serious about it. You don't see any dumping like you do see here in Hesperia or in Apple Valley. I mean, my work allows me to travel all throughout the desert, and I see dumping of stuff. That doesn't happen in national forests because if you get caught, they take it very, very seriously. But in the United States, I know I don't want to paint a picture of it's doom and gloom down in South America or Costa Rica, but in the United States, there are national protected areas that you can't log or do any of that stuff. So here's just the California National Forest. You can kind of see we're right here. So we got the San Bernardino National Forest, the Angeles National Forest. If you guys go up, what's another famous one? The Cleveland National Forest. If you guys have ever been to like Lake Elsinore or San Jacinto, those mountains right behind Lake Elsinore, that's the Cleveland National Forest. So it's a pretty drive if you go over to 74. There's quite a bit. So I mean, California does its part. Obviously, you can see down here, Southern California is really dry, right? So we have kind of sporadic. The further north you get, there's more because it generally rains more up in Northern California. So I mean, that makes sense. So what can the government, what can we do to reduce tropical deforestation? We practice small-scale sustainable agricultural and forestry in tropical forests. National governments, they can offer protection, crack down on illegal logging, and increase conservation reserve areas. In subsidies that fund logging roads. I know this is big up in Alaska, because I like watching the Alaska Gold Show. They have these big roads. Subsidized reforestation programs. And we're going to talk about one reforestation program right here. The Greenbelt Movement, founded in 1977. It was a women's self-help group organized to plant and protect millions of trees to combat deforestation and climate change and to provide fuel wood. Similar, once one of these things catches on, women's self-help group, there's always another group, another program that develops in another country or in the same country it's at, which I think is really good. So by 2012, 12.6 billion trees in 193 countries have been planted, which is good. So now we're increasing that sink again. So when you drive, the carbon can get sequestered in that. So the founder of that was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004, which is huge. I think they only give out, I don't know how many Nobel Peace Prizes they give out each year. Maybe it's only one. I don't know. We can Google it. So what are some solutions? Sustaining tropical forests. Prevention. We'll go through prevention first. Protect the most diverse and endangered areas. Educate settlers about sustainable agricultural and forestry. So subsidize only sustainable forest use. And that's kind of what we talked about at first, where you kind of have that loop of 30 years where you're planting 15-year trees and 25-year trees. That would be a sustainable forest use. Protect forests through debt for nature swamps and conservation concessions. Certify sustainable grown timber. I know it's hard because if you guys have a house or you guys ever done any work with lumber, it's always more expensive. It's just like organic produce. We love to eat organic produce, but it always costs more. And that's the same here. I mean, the sustainability of it, it's just more expensive. So when people go and they're building houses, they're, like we talked about, it's all about economics. If you can buy a piece of sheet wood for $4 that was, out of Oregon, and then the same sheet from a certified sustainability grown timber is $12. You're gonna go with the $4 one because it's cheaper. So I see that with organic produce all the time, and I can't taste the difference between an organic banana and a regular banana. I don't know about you guys, but I can't. I know it's good, but I just can't taste the difference. So, or any other organic fruit. So, reduce poverty and slow growth populations. But back to that whole food thing, it is actually good that we buy organic produce, because what happens is more and more people buy it, the more mainstream it becomes. And then after a while, all the farms will switch over to, hey, Americans don't want to buy regular bananas anymore. They want to buy organic bananas. And there'll be a shift, a cultural shift. So, or apples, or whatever fruit you want, or a vegetable. So restoration, encourage regrowth through secondary succession, rehabilitate degraded areas, concentrate farming and ranching in already cleared areas. So that means, and we saw that animation where they're cutting down forests so cattle can graze. We should concentrate our farming and ranching on areas that are already cut down or already cleared, so that we're not having to cut down trees any further. Okay, so how do we manage and sustain parks and our natural resources? National parks face many environmental threats. Worldwide, there's 6,600 major national parks in 120 countries. So it's, like I said, I don't want to paint the picture of South America and Brazil as being bad, but that's just one example I zoomed in on and saw the rapid expansion over 16, 17 years. But there are national parks in other countries, so don't think it's all the U.S. is best and everyone else is kind of behind us. No, there's in 120 countries there's national parks, which is great. So parks in developing countries, this is the one thing that I want to touch on and really touch, because we talked about it when I was in college. Parks in developing countries, so it's third world and second world countries. They have the greatest biodiversity, and why is that? Because these parks have not been, or these forests or these ancient growth forests have not been touched on or touched in a very long time. So the biodiversity between plants, animals, trees is the greatest. The bad part is only 1% is protected, and that's what needs to change, because there's a lot of things, like when I was in school, they had people from pharmaceutical companies and talk to us, because like I said, my undergrad degree is in chemistry, and talk about how we could get jobs going over to different countries and basically walking through the forest and picking flowers and trying to find out what drug or what cancer drug we can make off that flower. And believe it or not, there's a ton, and we're going to get to some examples of just common things that were found in plants, and now they're mainstream. Now you can go to Target and buy it. So that's why I underlined all this, because parks in developing countries is a huge, huge thing. So national parks, too small to sustain many large animal species. Did I read that right? National parks. Sustain many large animal species. Yeah, I'm not quite sure that's there. Wow, where did this come from? Actually, hold on real quick. Let me delete that slide. I don't know where this picture came from. Okay, so these are the United States national parks. So we had the national forests, now we have the national parks. So Joshua Tree, you know, that's in our backyard. That's only an hour away. You have, even though it's Death Valley, it's still considered a national park. And they sustain biodiversity. Even though it's in Death Valley, they have lizards, they have snakes, they have fish actually out in Death Valley. If you guys have ever been out to Death Valley, you can go down into this area where water flows in, and there's an endangered species fish that was only found in Death Valley. One thing cool too that I want you guys to know is, whenever you guys see a dry lake bed, like if you're on your way out to Lucerne Valley, going through the Bear, and you see those dry lake beds, there was once a lake there. I mean, there's a reason they call it a dry lake bed, because at one time when the climate was different hundreds of years ago, there was a lake there. So just like in Death Valley, there was a lake there once. So that's why you see fish species that are only out there for a specific reason. And we can go to all of them. Probably some of these you guys have been to. I've been to Glacier. I've been to Yellowstone when I was a kid. We go to Joshua Tree a lot. Yosemite we've been to. But yeah, it's a great thing that the U.S. and they have the same rules. And you can kind of see up in Alaska, there's a ton. I mean, we think there's a lot in California. There's a ton up in Alaska. So, and same with Hawaii and Costa Rica. So, all right, so there's 59 major parks, or 59 major national parks in the United States. States, counties, and cities also operate public parks. Silverwood Lake is a California state park. If you go there are laws, like if you kill a snake, you know, I'm terrified of snakes. But if you're at Silverwood and camping inside the park, you kill a snake and they catch you, it's a fine. You can go to jail for it. Same with bears. If someone were to hurt a bear or hit it with a shovel or something, and the ranger were to see that, you can go to jail, because they are protected species inside the state park. Biggest problem may be popularity. I mean, where does everyone want to go? I would love to go to Yellowstone on my next vacation. I would love it. But their popularity can sometimes be their downfall, because you have noise, which agitates bears and birds. You have congestion. You know, Yellowstone's so big. I'm going to pick on Yellowstone because it's so big. But you have Yellowstone. I mean, who doesn't want to go see Old Faithful? You know, shoot up 120 feet in the air. But you have roads that you have to go on, and that creates pollution with CO2 and everything like that. Then you have people who don't throw their stuff in the trash. I mean, it's been a while since I've been driving on the freeway and saw someone throw trash out their window, but I have seen it. I mean, as a culture, as a United States culture, I think we're moving away from that. You know, water pollution, whenever you're camping, and let's say you spill something, you have your little kerosene torch to light up at night, you spill the kerosene, that may end up in the water, you know, if you're near a creek. Damage to vegetation and wildlife disruption. So multiple stories, wildlife disruption. What do they say now? They have bear lockers, they're bear trash cans, is why bears have now become dependent on the food that we throw away to feed themselves. You see this in Mammoth, you see this in any area where there's food. So if you guys ever go to a national park, most likely they're gonna have bear trash cans, which are kind of like this odd, you gotta open it a weird way so that bears can't. Have you guys, who's seen some of these? So yeah, you guys have seen these. So That's a wildlife disruption. We are now training the bears subconsciously to go to humans for food, which should be the other way around. So, and damage to vegetation. I know they try to stop that, but that's inevitable when you have people and vehicles and everything like that. Damage from non-invasive species. This is a stress on the U.S. This is a case study, a stress on public parks. Damage from non-native species. The European wild boars. I've heard that those, they had them at the bottom of the grapevine down in Bakersfield, the base of Bakersfield. I heard that there's boars over there. Mountain goats. Native species native species sometimes killed or removed. I have a perfect example of this because we deal with this at my work all the time. Cottonwoods, cedars, and mesquite trees are all native to the Mojave River. These salt cedar trees that you see that are they get huge. They're bigger than this classroom. The roots. We actually fund, your taxpayer dollars fund, if you own a home or your parents own a home, those tax dollars go to kill invasive species, because what happens is they'll take up more water, and they're an invasive species, and they're taking water from native species that are supposed to be here. So that's a perfect example that my tax dollars and everybody else's are going towards in our local area. So salt cedars aren't usually up in this part of the river, but when you start getting down towards, down Victorville by D Street and towards Hellendale, you'll see them. Wish I had a picture of them. That didn't even cross my mind until just now. Threatened islands of biodiversity due to commercial development. You see this at Catalina. Threatened islands of biodiversity. There's a certain build out that an island can have, and I think Channel Islands as well. Due to commercial development. So build out means, every city has one. They have a build out, like Apple Valley is not fully built out yet. Same with Victorville. There's further west they can go in Victorville to keep building homes. That's what I mean by build out. But the purpose of this, and you guys have all heard of the Tapestry project that's supposed to go on Hesperia. So Hesperia is not even close to being built out. But one thing that protects the environment is the environmental impact report. This goes over every single piece of environment, every endangered species, every plant species, everything, where you're going to get the water from for your development. So if you guys hear of EIR, that's Environmental Impact Report. That's a report that the developer has to put together to protect the environment. And most often they are litigated, which means that when they come out, the developer comes out with their EIR, someone sues them. So because of something incorrect in the EIR, because there'll be some expert on some lizard that so they're often litigated. We're going to talk about the bark beetle. So this is kind of in our backyard. If you guys don't know what the bark beetle is, typically the bark beetle is in a symbiotic relationship with the trees, I think specifically pine trees, in the San Bernardino Forest and the Angeles National Forest. Sorry, I called it the San Gabriel National Forest, but that was the San Gabriel Mountains with the Angeles National Forest. So the San Bernardino National Forest comprises a lot of pine trees. The bark beetle is a symbiotic relationship when the trees are healthy, when there's water. When there's water, the trees are healthy, water's going up, the trees are growing, bark beetle really doesn't have any issues. What happens is when there's droughts, such as the one we had over the last 5 years, the bark beetle decimates these trees. They rapidly spread, they are first observed southwest portions of San Bernardino National Forest near communities of Crestline, Lake Gregory, and Lake Arrowhead. Right here, this is Lake Arrowhead. So this is in our own backyard. You can kind of see there's a little brown and then green. If you look at this circle, you can see how many brown trees there are. And that's because of the bark beetle taking over and destroying those trees. And eventually they spread to the entire forest. how do they combat that is, I mean, there's only a finite amount of water. I think everyone kind of knows that, especially in our desert and in our mountains. But having rain in our mountains helps slow or stop the eradication of these trees. But the beetles have been rapidly spread eastward in the communities of Running Springs, Big Bear Lake, and beyond. So some of the firewood that they clear, I can definitely see where the bark beetle goes underneath the bark and eats the trees. So that's another reason why developers or cities down the hill who plant these older trees may get rid of their trees because they may be infested with bark beetles and they don't want them to spread. So, but that's a perfect example, and this is from the United States Forest Service. And that was in April 2003. So imagine it now. Another case study is the reintroduction of the gray wolf to Yellowstone National Park. In 1850 and 1900, numbers of the gray wolf greatly diminished. Keystone predator species. In 1995, they were reintroduced, and by 2012, there were 98 gray wolves in the park. They prey on elk and push them higher to higher elevations. This is a ripple effect that has helped reestablish and sustain some biodiversity. So obviously, the elk come down because of grazing, because of fires. I don't know if you guys remember the Great Yellowstone Fire, but they come down after the fires and feed on the short grasses that are growing up in between the trees when there was no wolves present. But once they were reintroduced, they pushed the elk a little bit. They pushed them to higher elevations. Like I said, and that has a ripple effect on establishing some biodiversity, letting those small plants and trees come back. How am I doing on time? Okay, I got 20 minutes. All right, so nature's reserves, only a small portion of the earth. Natural reserves occupy only a small part of the Earth's land. Less than 13% of the Earth's land area is protected. That's in 2012. Conservationists goal want to see about 20% of the land protected, as in don't drive, this is a national park, this is a conservancy group. And that has to happen between cooperation between governments and private groups and concerned individuals. I'm going to talk about the Wildlands Conservancy, which is a nature conservancy in Landers and up in Pioneer Town. If you guys know where Pioneer Town is, all the way up to kind of Yucca Valley, kind of in the mountains. There's a huge, miles upon miles. I don't know exactly how big it is, but I know that you can't build, you can't do anything without the approval of the conservancy group. And even us driving our cars, we can drive it to the dirt parking lot, and other than that, it's completely fenced, and I know it's at least 15 or 20 miles a hike in, so I know it's square miles. So it's probably a couple hundred square miles that they have over there, but you can't do anything in that conservancy group without the approval of the conservancy group. This is kind of a pseudo, or I'm not gonna say fake, but a pseudo national park, to where if you kill a rattlesnake, they will come after you. They will call the cops and you will get a ticket, because the whole idea is to conserve nature in those areas. So when you go to those areas, you're gonna see nature, because they know rattlesnakes aren't gonna get killed. They know foxes and coyotes won't get killed. So. And they also have land trust groups, where basically they buy up large groups of land, large parcels of land, and they dedicate it to no development, just having it be nature, which I agree with. Part of it is you got to have a balance between development and nature. People got to be able to live, and you got to have nature around as well too. So we're going to look at Costa Rica. They were kind of recognized as a global conservation leader. It's kind of around 1963 to 1983, that 20 years period, much of their rainforest was cleared out. in the mid-70s, a system of natural reserves and national parks were established. So in between that period where it was just getting cleared out, the government said, hey, let's implement the system of national parks. And by 2012, 1/4 of the land in the natural reserves and national parks. Oh, 1/4 of the land in Costa Rica in national reserves or national parks. They have the buffer zone concept, which you're going to see on the next slide, and the habitat corridor. So it earns $1 billion per year in tourism. So you're kind of seeing this, yeah, we cut down trees to make paper and we need that, but you're also seeing, you know, hey, let's not clear our forests, let's make it national parks. People will come and see that. I mean, that's one big thing. I know my wife, and I'm going to show my kids, I want to take them to a national park so they get to see Yosemite when it's still there, before all the rock slides take down all those, what is it, El Capitan? You know, it's like, it's crazy. So here's Costa Rica. If you don't know where Costa Rica is, here's the Caribbean Sea, Nicaragua, and I don't know all the states, but I know Mexico is just a little bit further up. Panama, you have the Panama Canal, which you're allowed to pass from the Atlantic Ocean into the Pacific Ocean, is down here a little bit further. So we're kind of in that, right in the center of Central America, between South America and North America. So the national park zones are in the green, the buffer zones are in the yellow. So you can see that all these are national parks, which earns $1 billion in tourism each year. I'm sure the U.S. rivals that as well, but they've made a concentrated effort to restore these buffer zones to where no activities going here. They're going to help these green spots get bigger and bigger and bigger, which is going to help in tourism and everything like that. So it's that's why they've been recognized as a conservation leader when it comes to forests. Where wilderness land officials designate having no serious disturbance to land. There's controversy. I know I'm running short on time because I talked too long. Wilderness Act 1964 protected undeveloped lands. 2% of the lower 48 protected. Lower 48 meaning the lower 48 states, mainly in the West. There's a tenfold increase from that 2%, which would be 20% from 1970 to 2010. That's because people are starting to realize the environment, we have to take care of it, it's there. If we take care of it, people will come. Kind of like, was it Field of Dreams? If we build it, they will come. If we build national parks, maintain them, they will come. In 2009, 2 million more acres get wilderness protection, a 50% increase in length of wild and scenic rivers, and that's the Wildlands Conservancy example. When I first started at Mojave about 8-9 years ago, the Wildland Conservancy group didn't own that area. They went in there and bought that area and bought all the houses that were empty, and they bought them out. And now there's, even though it's not a flowing river, when it rains, that river's there for people to view. So, and that's investor. I think that's an investor owned, like that. The land trust group. That's who kind of made that Wildland Conservancy. So there's a 5-point strategy approach. We map the global ecosystems. We identify the species, identify resilient and fragile ecosystems. We locate and protect most endangered ecosystems and species. We restore degraded ecosystems, and we provide incentives for biodiversity and friendly development. I recently had a run-in last week with people from Flagstaff that were trying to trap this one rare turtle in the river by Hallandale. So they were out there trying to, and these are biologists that are getting paid to do this, they go out there and set traps to analyze and do these turtles, and they've told me that the turtle population has been on decline ever since they've been measuring it for the last 30 years in the Mojave area. Even though this isn't the only area they're close to the coast, but they monitor it in the Mojave area as well. This is important. Okay, so important action strategy urge to identify and protect biodiversity hotspots. 2% of the Earth's surface contains 50% of the flowering plant species, 42% of all terrestrial vertebrates, which are kind of like the bark beetles and stuff like that. Hotspots are homes for endangered species and 1.2 billion people. So here's kind of the hotspots. You can kind of see California up north, there's a little bit, but you see a lot in Mexico and in Central America.
along as the Caribbean islands, as all the way down Chile, and then Brazil, where I took that photo from I showed you guys earlier. You also have Spain, parts of the Middle East. I think this, I'm not sure what state that is. It's south of Russia. Here's the Philippines, East Africa and West Africa. And what we're going to look at, you can kind of see the coast all around South Africa. Kind of where, I don't know if you guys know this, but Neville's from South Africa. So kind of interesting. But we're going to look at Madagascar, fourth largest island off the coast of Africa. 200,000 plants and animal species. 90% of these are only found here. So that's when I was telling you in my classes, they'd come in for the chemists and say, we need you to go out in the middle of the jungle, and I'm being serious. Find these plants, bring it back to the lab, and see what type of things they have. And these were jobs that they were offering to undergrad students that were at Cal State San Bernardino. So many of the plants and animal species are endangered due to habitat loss, efforts to slow the loss of biodiversity. I looked up some stuff on Madagascar, and they're kind of going through some crises right now. I think just like every country is right now, seems like. But this is what I want to get to. Common drugs that are derived from plants. Obviously caffeine, right? Used to treat fatigue and migraines. If you guys get migraine medicine with like Tylenol in it, it will have caffeine because it helps some receptors in the brain open up so that it treats migraines. Aspirin, used for pain relief and anti-clotting agent, which means you take a baby aspirin a day, it doesn't clot your blood, so you're not going to have a stroke. That was off the willow bark salix plant. Digitalis, used to treat arrhythmia, which is heart arrhythmias, which are irregular heartbeats. That was from foxglove. I could put on here morphine from the poppy plant, but that gets a bad rap because people use it recreational for other stuff. But that's one thing that if you go in surgery, you're going to get, and that was from the poppy plant. So a lot of these things, a lot of drugs come from plants. And now, obviously, aspirin, what you do is you go out there and find the plant, find that is good for pain relief and blood anti-clotting, and then they recreate the structure, mass produce it, and sell it. But the original formulation came from a plant. So let's get back to the. Let's see. Let's get into the marine stuff. How can we protect and sustain marine biodiversity? We have much to learn about aquatic biodiversity, greatest marine biodiversity in coral reefs, estuaries, and on the deep ocean floor. It's also high near the coast than in the open sea. Obviously, that's an estuary, which is kind of like where the ocean kind of comes in. You guys can see it if you're driving down to San Diego. There's the ocean comes in, and that's considered an estuary where you have plants and birds and everything that nests there. Biodiversity is higher in the bottom region of the ocean than the surface region. So you have more biodiversity at the bottom of the ocean, which is extremely deep, than at the top. Greatest threats: habitat loss and degradation, dredging, and commercial fishing. I personally love to go deep sea fishing, love to catch tuna. Where do we always go? We always go by the commercial fishing boats. And why is that? Because they have 4 helicopters in the air monitoring these schools of tuna. And we always catch tuna because we use rods and reels, but they're netting. And we have some pictures of that here coming up. Coral reefs, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but coral reefs are threatened by pollution, growing acidity, which is CO2, and I don't think I've mentioned this, the second greatest sink of CO2, of carbon in the world is the ocean, because there's so much phytoplankton on top that they just eat it up. They use the CO2 for energy, and they emit oxygen as a byproduct. So that is a huge thing, not just coral reefs, but the ocean, the phytoplankton on top. So, but coral reefs are threatened by pollution, growing acidity, and warmer waters. Global warming is increasing the rate at which warmer waters, and when I say warmer waters, I'm saying like 1/10 of a degree. But that 1/10 of a degree has a snowball effect. climate change we just talked about, human population growth, and overfishing. Okay, good. We end at 10:20, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Difficulties in protecting marine biodiversity, population and pollution. Much of the damage is not visible. Like I said, dying coral reefs, they're turning white. If you guys have seen any studies on these vibrant green, blue, the coral reefs that you would think of when you go to Hawaii, they're turning white because of the increased temperature and the increased CO2 in the water. And that has a snowball effect that increases the sea level rise when you have that climate change. Like I said, the sea is incorrectly viewed as the exhaustible resource and as a bottomless sink for CO2, and it's not. Like I said, there's only so much you can put into the forests and the rain systems and the oceans of carbon dioxide before the sink gets full. And that's why you keep seeing CO2 levels rise, because these sinks are so full. And we keep cutting down the rainforests and polluting our oceans, and that sink's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So most of the oceans lie outside of legal jurisdiction of any country. When I go deep sea fishing, like I said, I have to get a Mexican permit to go down and fish in Mexican waters. And that's where all of the fishing nets, if you guys get on Google Earth and just scroll down the coast real close, you'll see these white buoys right along the Mexican border, where they trap tuna and they feed them till they're 300-400 pounds, and they ship them over to Japan. You guys have probably seen those shows on Discovery, where it's they in Boston they catch these big bluefin tuna, and then they ship them over to Japan. They put them on ice and then ship them over there. It's kind of sad. This was a picture I found. This was the pollution I'm talking about. They have, I think, 5 or 6 major plastic areas in the ocean. I tried to find a picture, but with the currents, when plastics is emitted in the ocean, the currents always kind of let it group together. This was probably somewhere, I know when they had the games in, was it Brazil? They didn't let the swimmers swim for a little bit because the ocean was so polluted. So this is something that they run into, this plastic bottles, trash, everything. So you can kind of see their net, they're trying to keep it contained. Regulatory measures, U.S. Marine, yeah, like I said, all these are U.S. based things, but like I said, our jurisdiction is not the entire ocean. We don't own the ocean. We only own what's off our coast to a certain extent. So whatever people do other than that is, that's why if you guys have ever seen that show, the Sea Shepherd, where they go and try to fight the whalers, it's a funny show if you guys want to watch it. But they have the nets where they collect tuna, or not tuna, but fish. And also here you see them, they're trapping fish to collect them for sardines. They'll put them in cans, they'll put them on shelves in Walmart and Target. Let's see, how much time do I have? Yeah, let's skip that. Freshwater ecosystems are under a major threat. Dams destroy many freshwater wetlands. Because why is that? Because dams are based on how fast they can release, or when they can release energy and how much that energy is worth. At night it's worth more, so they may release more during the night. Invasive species, pollution. You guys are seeing the same kind of the same these three: invasive species, pollution, and climate change on almost everything that I've read in the book. The invasive species, the pollution, and the climate change. Those are 3 things that are definitely affecting our environmental resources and sustainability. Let's move on. This one is actually, I think, is pretty interesting. So can a Great Lake survive repeated invasive species by an alien species? They're basically inundated with invasive species. They have 180 non-invasive species examples: sea lamprey, the zebra mussel, and the Asian carp. Have you guys ever seen videos of them going down the Mississippi and the carp just jumping up out of the water? Google it. It's actually pretty cool because they make games out of it. They try to catch as many as they can. These shellfish came over from Europe in the ballast tanks of boats. So the big freight liners that they have the stuff that you see on trains or on big rigs, they stack those on, and to make sure it doesn't tip over. They have ballast tanks where they fill in water. So over in Europe, they filled in the water to make sure the boat doesn't rock. So they use water to kind of stabilize it, even though it's a boat. But they brought over these zebra mussels, and now the Great Lakes are inundated. This is a coastline in the Great Lakes where it should be sand and rocks. It's covered in zebra mussels. So what happens is people take their boats from the Great Lakes over down to California or to Lake Mead, which I love going to Lake Mead. And you can see here's a perfectly good pipe. Once it's exposed to quagga mussels 2 months in, 4 months in, and 6 months, the pipe's almost clogged. So that's why when you go Silverwood or any of the state water project lakes, they do boat inspections, and they'll get in your boat and tear it apart to make sure you don't have any water, so that they don't get this and these zebra mussels in. And like I said, that's someone who left their boat in for a summer. That's what happens to it. So I think I got 1 more minute, but do you guys have any questions? I know I didn't get through all of it. I'll send Lynn the PowerPoint. Are there any questions? No? Okay. I'm a firm believer in getting out of here on time. So she'll post the PowerPoint on your guys's, because this is the hybrid class, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you have any questions, shoot them to Lynn and she'll shoot them to me. So, but thank you.